We continue now at the top of Daf Yomi Gemara Mesechet Shekalim. This is Shekalim Daf 11b. The Gemara here is discussing what you do with the moser ketoris. Let's say they prepared the ketoris for the whole year and they have a little bit of extra. So what do they do with that ketoris? And so the Gemara said you use it, you take the kedusha from that ketoris, you somehow put it on the money that's in the Trumas Halishka, and you use that money to pay the workers. The question is, what exactly is the process? The money that's in the Trumas Halishka is already kaddish, and the ketoris, the moser ketoris, is also kaddish. You can't be meschalel something that's hektish on something else that's hektish. So what the Gemara said in the previous Amud is, you take the money from the Trumas Halishka and you're mechalel that kedusha onto the stones of the Beis Hamikdash. In other words, when they would build the Beis Hamikdash, they would build it, there would be stones of chulin, and then they would have to be mekadesh it. How are you mekadesh it? You take some of the money from the Trumas Halishka, you take the kedusha from that money, and you say, this kedusha goes onto the stones now have that kedusha. Then what you do is, you bring the ketores, umevi ketores, now you're going to bring the ketores itself, which has kedusha, and you take the kedusha from the ketores and you put it onto this money, which now is chulin, because again, the kedusha from the money has went on to the avnei habinyan. And then you can use that money and give it to the workers as part of their wages. Now the idea is, this money now is considered to have kedusha from the truma yeshana. It's the old trumas halishka. It's not the trumas halishka from this year. It's the trumas halishka from the previous year, and you can use the trumas halishka from the previous year to pay workers who work for the Beis Hamikdash. Now the Gra says you take out this next line of Osen Hamos Mayasa Bohen, and the Gemara continues. Rebbe says, Omer Ani, I say Yinasnu leves Garmu uleves Avtinas, that the money should specifically be used to pay the house of Garmu. These are particular workers, and the house of Avtinas, also particular workers. Why? Shahayu bekiyin bepitum hakatores uvemaisa lechem haponim. These particular families were experts when it came to creating the ketores, when it came to making the lechem haponim, and therefore again you're allowed to pay them from the truma yeshana. That's how it works. The trumas halishka from the previous year can be used to pay these people. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak says, V'hein sheyihu chayovin lohen mos misha rishona. This is all only true if they did the work earlier. In other words, you're allowed to pay them from the moser ketoris for work that they did in the previous year. But if they're going to do work this year, then you're going to have to pay them from the trumas halishka of this year. That's why, as we said before, the kedusha that's on this mos is considered truma yeshana. It's considered trumas halishka kedusha from the previous year. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Chia bar Ba, boy, Rabbi Chia bar Ba asked the following question. Lo hayu chayavin len mos misha harishona. Let's say you don't have workers to pay from the previous year. So now you don't have that ability to use the money for that. So what should you use the money for? So the Gemara says, Asa Rabbi Ba b'shem Rabbi Chia b'shem Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Ba came in the name of Rabbi Chia in the name of Rabbi Yossi. Mekaitzin bohenes hamizbech. Then you can, in that case, you can use this money again that has this kedusha from the moser hakatores in order to bring karbanas on the mizbeach during the summertime when the mizbeach is batel. And now the person who just asked the question was Rabbi Chia bar Ba right over here, and the answer is Rabbi Chia bar Ba. That's the exact same person who answered the question as the person who asked the question. So that's why the Gemara now says Rabbi Ba bar Kohen boy kume Rabbi Yosa. Rabbi Ba bar Kohen now asked in front of Rabbi Yossi, Mechalfa shitasi did Rabbi Chia bar Ba? Did Rabbi Chia bar Ba forget his own answer? He asked the question and then we quote an answer in his name. So what's going on? So the Gemara says Tamon srichole v'kop shitole. No, there was one part that was needed for him, meaning he did have one question, but there was one thing that was obvious to him. And the Gemara explains, he wasn't sure whether you could use the money to purchase klishares. That was actually his question. But he was certain that you could use it for the summertime karbanas on the mizbeach. So in other words, when he answered you can use it for the karbanas, that was the part that he was sure about. What he's asking is, can you also use it for the klishares? That actually was his question. And the Gemara continues, the espalgun, we have the following machlokas. Let's say you have a situation, pitma bechulin. Let's say you have a situation where you create the ketores with ingredients that are all chulin, meaning at the time that you're making the ketores, you're doing it with ingredients that are chulin. Rabbi Yossi bei Rabbi Chanina Amar. Rabbi Yossi bei Rabbi Chanina says, psula, that's going to be puzzle, it's no good. You have to make the ketores from ingredients which are already hektish. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi Amar Ksheira. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says it's no problem, it's still kosher, you'll just make it hektish afterwards. So the Gemara now says, my time with Rabbi Yossi bei Rabbi Chanina. What's the reason of Rabbi Yossi bei Rabbi Chanina? Kodeshi, because the pasuk says it is holy. Shetehei havayasa bekodesh, meaning it has to be created already holy. And the Gemara says, Matayim ad Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. What's the reason of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi? Same pasuk, Kodesh he. It says it has to be holy, meaning Shetehei ba mitrumas halishka. All that means is that it's made from the trumas halishka, meaning, as we said, the money that you're going to be used to create the ketores, that money that's going to be used for that purpose, is coming from a holy place. It's coming from the trumas halishka. And the Gemara says further, Amar Rabbi Yossi Bei Rabbi Bon. Rabbi Yossi Bei Rabbi Bon says, Asya de Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina kishmuel. Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina, who says it's possible if it's made from ingredients that are chulin, he follows Shmuel. With Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, who says that it's kosher in such a case, he follows the position of Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara now continues and explains. The Taninan, because we learned in the Mishnah as follows. Hamakdish nechasav. Let's say somebody takes his property and he makes it hektish. And some of the things that he made hekdesh are fit to be karbanos sibor. So the point of the Mishnah is you can use it as karbanos sibor. So the Gemara wanted to know what items exactly are we talking about that he's making hekdesh. So Rabbi Yochanan Amar ketores. Rabbi Yochanan says we're talking about the ketores. So that's exactly the case. In other words, what did the person do? He had ketores that he made that was chulin, and then he was makdish it. That seems to be exactly the case. So you see that you can be makdish ketores that's already been made, and when it was made, it was chulin. So the Gemara says not necessarily a proof. Amar Rav Hoshia says, Tiftor bu'uman mishel beis haftinas. You could very well say that this ketores that we're talking about that was chulin is talking about the ketores from the craftsman in the beis haftinas. Shayanot el bischaro ketores, because that's exactly what we've been saying all along. What did they used to do? They used to take as payment the ketores. In other words, when you had extra ketores, you would pay them with this ketores, and the ketores would become chulin. So you can have a situation where you had ketores that was hektish, that becomes chulin for the purpose of paying the workers. So that could be a situation where you have ketores that's already chulin. And again, it wouldn't be a proof. It could be that when you're making the ketores originally, it has to be made from ingredients that are kodesh, so no proof from there. And the Gemara continues with Rabbi Yossi Bei Rabbi Chanina k'Shmuel. Rabbi Yossi Bei Rabbi Chanina, who said that it's possible, who said that the ingredients must be kodesh, he follows the position of Shmuel. The Amar Rav Huna b'Shem Shmuel, because Rav Huna said in the name of Shmuel, Machteshes asu osa kechli shares l'kodesh. The machteshes, which was the utensil that was used to pound the ingredients for the ketores, to create the ketores, that also has the status of klishares. That's considered kodesh. So what do you see? You see that already at the stage of the ingredients, everything has kedusha, everything is considered hektish. So again, you see Rabbi Yossi Bei Rabbi Chanina follows Shmuel's position. And so the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Yossi Bei Rabbi Bon. Rabbi Yossi Bei Rabbi Bon says, Amra Rabbi Chona Kumi Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Chona said the following in front of Rabbi Yossi, meaning he asked the following question. We just said before, Shmuel just said before, that when they created the ketores, they did it basically with klishares. They did it all b'kedusha. So now he asks the following question. Davar shekidesh b'klishares. If you have ketores which was sanctified in a klishares, nifta, are you really saying that can eventually be redeemed? Because again, as we said before in the Mishnah, eventually when this ketores becomes leftover, when there's extra, you're going to redeem it in order to pay the workers. But you're not allowed to redeem things that were sanctified in a klishares. So how does this fit together? So he said back to him, Amar Lei said to him, V'lo de Shmuel, that statement before, that said that it's like a klishares, that when you prepare the ketores, it's sanctified in a klishares, that was a statement made by Shmuel. But Shmuel is fine with this. The Shmuel Amar Kalhu b'Mosar. Shmuel is actually the one that says that whenever you have something left over, something extra that is hektish, you're allowed to be lenient in terms of its redemption. The Ispalgun, because we have the following machlokas that involves Shmuel. It says Hosiru Tamimim. It says, let's say they had extra Tamimim, meaning they had extra karbonos that have no blemishes. This is talking specifically in a situation of Rosh Chodesh Nisan. They had a lot of extra karbonos that are around, so they have these extra karbonos that were set aside, designated for carbon tamid. What are they supposed to do with these extra karbonos? So the Gemara says, Shmuel Amar Niftin Kitmimim. Shmuel says, well, since they're extra, since we had a bunch of extra karbonos, we had too many karbonos that were designated for carbon tamid, you can just redeem it even while it is tamim, meaning even while it's whole, even when there's no blemish, you're allowed to redeem, even though normally you only redeem something that was designated as a carbon when it gets a blemish. So you see that Shmuel holds when you have extra hektish, we're lenient in the redemption process, and the same is going to be true for the extra ketores. For Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. Rabbi Yochanan says, Niftin kipsule hamukdashim. You have to let them develop a mum in the normal way, and then you can redeem it after it has a mum. And the Gemara now carries this logic onward. Hosiru seirim. Let's say you have a situation where you have seirim that are extra. In other words, they designated goats for karbonos tzibor. This is talking specifically about carbon chatos of a tzibor. For example, you have the seir of the chatos of Rosh Chodesh, something like that. So then it got lost. Then you separate another one. So the point is, you have extra. Basically the same case as before, where you had karbonos that were designated as carbon ola that are extra. Now we're talking about karbonos that were designated as carbon chatos that are extra. So the Gemara says, Al daite the Shmuel, according to Shmuel, that you're allowed to be lenient when you have extra hektish. So im ola niftis, if you have a situation where you're allowed to redeem a carbon ola, even when it is not blemished, so lo kol shekein chatos, certainly a chatos is not as holy as an ola. By an ola, the entire thing goes on the mizbeach. So for sure, by a chatas, you'd be allowed to be lenient in the redemption process. And the Gemara says, Al daite de Rabbi Yochanan. Now, according to Rabbi Yochanan, who said that by carbon ola we have to be strict, we have to wait for it to get a blemish. That already it's a machlokis. What's going to be the halacha by chatos? Amar Reb Zeira Yiru. Reb Zeira says the same halacha over here. You have to let it graze. You have to let it develop a mum. But Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak says no. When it comes to the goats that were designated for public carbon chatos, mekaitzin ben mizbeach, you can actually use it in the summertime to bring karbonos, which are olos, on the mizbeach, because again the mizbeach is not supposed to be bottle. So the Gemara now asks on Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, V'kasha, that's difficult. Yesh chatas shekreva ola. You're allowed to take something that was designated originally as a carbon chatas and bring it as a carbon ola. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yosef says, Shan Yuhi, it's different over here. She'ein karbonos tzibor nikvan ela b'shchita. When it comes to karbonos tzibor, they are set, they are designated at the time of shchita. This animal has not been slaughtered yet, so you're actually allowed to change its designation, in this case from carbon chatas to carbon ola. Amar Rabbi Chia gives a different answer. Tanai bezdinhu al hamoser sheyikravu olos. Rabbi Chia says a different answer, that when it comes to extra, there's a Tanai bezdin, there's a condition made by the courts that it can be brought as olos. So in other words, according to Rabbi Chia's answer, it's not that karbonos tzibor are designated at the time of shchita. It's specifically when you have extra, when you have moser, then there's a halacha, there's a Tanai bezin that it can be brought as carbon ola, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph.